Hello again. This video is about sex between minors, which is a legal issue which may or may not require a child abuse report. And it's completely age dependent. So we'll be working through the ages in which you would report sex between minors and the ages in which you would maintain confidentiality. Okay, so it's important to remember that when considering vaginal intercourse, behavior that is illegal is not necessarily considered abusive or reportable by MFTs. So for example, consensual sex between a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old is technically illegal, but if it was consensual, it's not reportable as child abuse in the context of therapy. So it all depends on the age of the partners. It's also important to remember that the parameters that I'll be going over in this video are for consensual, non-coerced sexual contact. If the minor in the pairing or the minors in the pairing were drunk, threatened, or intimidated into the act or into giving consent, it is reportable even if the minor gave consent, because that consent wasn't really consent. Okay, and of course, any non-consensual sex or sexual contact with minors is reportable per the child sexual abuse reporting mandates that we went over in the child abuse lecture. So I'll be introducing a couple of important ages to help you navigate this legal issue and when and where to report and how to report. So 13 is the first age that we'll go over. 13 is a unique age because in terms of child abuse reporting for sex between minors, 13-year-olds are only legally permitted in terms of reporting to have sex with other minors who are 13 or younger, okay? So if you have a 13-year-old who has sex with another 13-year-old or someone under the age of 13, and that sex is consensual, then it is confidential in terms of the therapy relationship, and you should not, cannot report it as child abuse to CPS. One more time, a 13-year-old having sex with someone who's 13 or younger, and it's consensual by both parties, is kept confidential in the therapy room and does not necessitate a mandated child abuse report. If a 13-year-old engages in sexual contact with anyone older than 13, so 14 and above, that becomes a reportable incident and you would call CPS to file a child abuse report. So a 13-year-old with a 14-year-old, for example, is reportable to CPS, a mandated report. Okay, next, sorry, I'm gonna move that over, is the drink and drive rule. Okay, so when I was studying for the law and ethics exam, I learned about the drink and drive rule for identifying whether or not sex between minors is reportable. I found it super helpful, so I'm going to share it with you. So first, the ages. So you have to be 21 years old to drink, and you have to be 16 years old to drive. Okay, so those are the two important ages, 21 and 16. So if one of the sexual partners is old enough to drink, meaning 21 or older, their sexual partner needs to be old enough to drive, meaning 16 or older, for you to maintain confidentiality. If the 21 or older person's partner is under 16, you must file a report. It's reportable. Okay, so a 21-year-old with a 15-year-old, reportable. Now, if none of the sexual partners are old enough to drink, meaning they are both 20 or younger, and the other partner is over 13, remember the rules about 13, you maintain confidentiality, okay? If anyone here is there's 13 or under, it is reportable, okay? All right, so again, if a partner is old enough to drink, meaning they're 21 or older, their partner must be old enough to drive, 16 or older. Anything outside of that is reportable. Okay. Now, for some, a visual representation is much more helpful. And so I've copied here a chart that's used to tell you whether or not something is reportable based on the two ages of the sexual partners. I'm going to move myself back over. Okay. So this is here. It's also uploaded on Canvas for you if you're more of a visual person. Okay. All right, now pregnant minors. Age matters in cases of pregnant minors. Okay, obviously if they're pregnant, that means they've had sex. So if your client is a pregnant 13-year-old, okay, this is only reportable if her partner, you may have guessed it, is older than 13. Remember, 13-year-olds can only legally have sex and not be reported if their partners are 13 or younger. Okay, so if the pregnant 13-year-old's client has a partner who is 13 or younger, no report is needed. If the pregnant 13-year-old client has a partner who's older than 13, it is reportable. If your client is pregnant and 14 or older, the rules that we already discussed with regard to the drink and drive rule apply. Okay, so the 14-year-old pregnant client can have sex basically with anyone who is 20 or younger, right? Well, minus 13. So the 14-year-old client can have sex with anyone who's 14 to 20. Outside of those parameters, it is reportable. Okay, so let's practice a few pairings because it can be kind of hard to wrap your mind around this. So is it reportable? You have a 14-year-old who comes to therapy telling her therapist she's pregnant with her 17-year-old boyfriend's baby. In this case, since no one is old enough to drink, meaning no one is 21, and no one is under the age of 13, this is not reportable. You would maintain confidentiality. Okay, next one. A 13-year-old boy reports consensual sex with his 14-year-old best friend. Remember, a 13-year-old can only have sex with a partner who's 13 or younger. In this case, the partner is 14, so this is a mandated report. And then the last one, a 22-year-old female has sex with a 17-year-old. In this case, one of the partners is old enough to drink. There's a 22-year-old here. So that means the partner must be old enough to drive, 16. Here we have a 17-year-old. This is okay, not reportable, kept confidential. All right, so some examples. Now, how might this come up on an exam? You're not going to have age pairings necessarily, but how is it going to come out in a question? So here's an example. A 15-year-old client reports that he has been having sex with his new girlfriend. The therapist is unsure of the girlfriend's age, but knows she is younger than the client. The therapist believes the client is too young to be having sex. How should the therapist handle the client's disclosure? And then answer choices. A, remind the client of the limits of confidentiality as it relates to sex between minors. B, seek consultation to handle countertransference. D, determine the age of the girlfriend. Or sorry, that was C. And D, file a child abuse report. So take a moment and we'll discuss the answer. Okay, so let's return to our vignette. Okay, so here we have an issue of sex between minors, right? Because we have a 15-year-old having sex with a girlfriend. We don't know the age. So if we knew the age, then we could determine from those ages whether or not it's reportable or if we should keep this confidential. We also have thrown in here a little bit of the therapist's own beliefs about sex, right? But the question that they're asking is, how should the therapist handle the client's disclosure? So they're very specifically getting at, is this reportable? That's what they're asking. How should the therapist handle the disclosure? Okay. Now, since we don't know the age of the partner, we can't, from the information we have, know whether or not to make a report. Okay. So let's then look at the answers once again. So A, remind the clients of limits of confidentiality. This is a helpful answer because it is reminding the client of the rules to support their autonomy and self-determination in terms of sharing information. By reminding the client that based on what they say, we may end up having to break confidentiality, the 15-year-old can decide with all the information that they need whether or not to tell you how old the partner is or whether or not to tell you anything else about the situation. So this is looking like a good answer. B, seek consultation. This is helpful, but it doesn't respond to the question about disclosure. This is something that the therapist should probably do regardless if she's got some beliefs or some biases about sex amongst minors. Determine the age of the girlfriend. This is not honoring self-determination. If your next statement to the client is, how old is your partner, in order to see whether or not you're going to need to report it, this isn't giving the client the information that they need to make a determination about whether or not to tell you. Okay, they may think that if they tell you because it was consensual, you don't have to report it, but that wouldn't necessarily be true based on the age. So this isn't a helpful answer. D, file the child abuse report. we don't have enough information yet. We don't know the age of the partner. And based off of the decision the client makes, we might not know the age of the partner. So we would not file. So this leaves us with A being the best answer. We honor the autonomy of the client by reminding her of the informed consent and limits of confidentiality as they relate to sex between minors, and then allowing the client to decide whether or not to share any more information with us. Based on what the client shares, it may later necessitate a child abuse report, it may not. But the first thing we want to do is A. Okay, so this is the last slide, but I want to give you just a quick reminder about some of these ages. So remember, 13 is the first important age. 13-year-olds can have sex with other minors who are 13 or younger, and we maintain confidentiality in those cases. If the 13-year-old is having sex with anyone 14 or older, that is a mandated report. And then the next ages were 21 and 16, the drink and drive rule. Someone who's old enough to drink, age 21, can only have sex with a partner who's old enough to drive, 16. Okay, so 21-year-old can have sex with anybody who is 16 to 21 or 21 and older. Anyone under 16, that's a report. So a 21-year-old with a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, reportable, okay? Otherwise, it's kept confidential if the partner of the 21-year-old is 16 or older. The same is true if they're older than 21, right? So if you have a 25-year-old, as long as their partner is 16 or older, it's not reportable, it's kept confidential, okay? If none of the partners are old enough to drink, none of them are 21, as long as both are either under 13 or both are over 13, then it is kept confidential. So that's a couple of different ways to run it through your mind to try to wrap your head around it. If it's unclear, let me know. I can give you some more examples, or we can go over the rules again together in class. Otherwise, have a good one. Thanks for listening.